Hi folks. Now in this fascinating video, we're going to provide you a mathematical proof of a massive Hebrew fecundity. Are you intrigued yet? You should be. Now, you may have heard it said that there's just no way there were so many Hebrews enslaved in Egypt. No? Also, that there's just no way that those Hebrew women could have had so many children in so little time. Just no way that those Fertile Crescent women could be so incredibly prolific, having a fecundity rivaling that of modern-day Niger. Well, not the least bit intimidated by such modern-day skepticism, the fearless Glenn Fritz has demonstrated that it is indeed mathematically possible. He has aptly demonstrated that possibility in his masterful book, The Exodus Mysteries. Whereas I will be demonstrating that not only is it plausible, but rather highly probable, based on an artifact recorded at the very time of the Exodus. Yes, the very time of the Exodus, based on a Hebrew inscription that was recorded perhaps 5 weeks into their journey out of Egypt. An inscription more fully presented in my Birthing Billboard article published at Academia. And it was in that lengthy article that I demonstrated there was a great many wilderness births documented on a certain artifact, documenting over 200 live births during that 5-week time span, including the documenting of twins and triplets, a documenting that compares reasonably well with our modern day rates of twins and triplets. Yet even that modest number of births is quite impressive. That is, if you consider how enormously challenged that Hebrew population was during that most recent period of slavery. Which is to say, quite impressive numbers if you consider how greatly challenged those Hebrews were to progenate, let alone copulate, in Egypt. Greatly challenged in Egypt, with infanticide running rampant. And later, greatly challenged in Arabia for various other reasons. But to the Hebrews' credit, the modest number of vertical strokes recorded on that Birthing Billboard artifact is only taking into account all live births that occurred, and is not taking into account all the miscarriages and stillborn that would have typically occurred, both before and during that stressful exodus. Also, that more modest number should not assume that all those postmodern mothers were terribly eager to fill out that bolder census, since they had better things to do. Better things like nursing or babysitting. Oh yeah, cattle too, at the time. Far too busy to fill out that tedious census at that massive campground. After all, would you walk a few kilometers for that? Huh? To fill out a birthing census while their husbands were busy fighting their arch rivals to the death a mere 7 kilometers away? We're busy battling those Amalekites on the backside of that birthing boulder? A boulder leading to the battlefield. A boulder barely shielded from those battle cries by a nominal hill. But setting all those perfectly credible birthing numbers aside, we are now going to generate a credibility factor for my incredible translation. Generate a probability factor, just as I have done earlier with my petroglyph panel translation. Since this translation too can be evaluated scientifically, dear reader, dear viewer. Yes, can be evaluated with a methodology that is not being employed by any other epigrapher at the moment, much to their sloppy shame. And with AI being so readily available anymore, there are simply no excuses for not doing the math. So let's start with that actual birthing word on that billboard then, shall we? Let's start with my translation of that yalad. A yalad that meant beget from the very beginning of time. From the very beginning of Hebrew, at any rate, since the Arabic language was much, much later. And as mentioned in my Billboard article, the Arabs warped that primal word with a W, turning it into a wonky
Ulad.
now. A word that both looked and sounded so radically different. You would never recognize it if you saw it. And that was the warped intent. So, all transcription error aside, we now have all 5 letters arranged in the very order they ought to be in, complete with the correct reading direction, the Hebrew reading direction. And what are the scientific odds all that happening, dear mathematicians? If there are only 22 letters at our disposal? Huh? Well, according to standard probability theory, we then have a 5 million to 1 probability of this yalad being a valid word. That is, unless there is an extremely wild spelling error there. Wild, since chiseling is a whole lot of work. However, this is not some random word generation, folks. This word generation was totally intentional and totally peer approved. Approved by a great mass of postpartum mothers. And you don't want to argue with them. A great mass that approved of this tedious itemizing, and itemizing of the very where and when of a certain birth day. Itemizing, even to the point of including several pictographs of the squatting process, of the isometrics involved. Too much information, you might say. Itemized with a very linear chronology, with a very specific birth date. Give or take a day, give or take some postpartum brain fog. Being itemized on a massive map, and a very good map at that. A map that even I could recognize. So, taking those additional factors into account grants my translation even more probability, folks. Exponential probability. Math that is painful to think about. But let's be generous to all you skeptics out there, shall we? And let's just confine our math to that earlier figure. What was it? Was it 5 million to 1? Okay. And let you ponder that enormity for a moment. Do think about it soberly, okay? Dum, 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 dum. Now, do you still want to kick against those pricks? Still want to bet against those enormous odds? Those odds of a massive Hebrew exodus? Or do you just want to bet against all those miracles that supposedly happened along the way? And especially those 10 commandments. Well, I got a surprise for you. But that's another article. Oh, and by the way, I never got around to telling you about the creator of those little miracles, the creator of all those little blessings, and creator of all those curses as well. A creator who is also named on that birthing billboard in question. Named in the preeminent position. Named at the very top of that boulder. Fancy that. A glorious name that is also inscribed on a nearby artifact. An artifact at that aforementioned battlefield. An artifact immediately beside another miracle or two. Immediately beside a splitting and gushing miracle. Beside a rock that you can bet your life on. A rock that those warriors were trying to claim. But we won't go into that here, since I've already presented on that artifact in a completely separate article. Having presented that glorious artifact in a much longer article entitled The Third Commandment Observed. Yet another edifying article, completely free to you at Academia EDU. An academic website where I have proven that nomastic discovery without a shadow of a doubt. Proven our earliest inscription of the name above all names. So now you are totally undone, dear skeptic, or certainly ought to be. Undone by the divine name as well. Undone by the very name of Yahweh. And sadly, there is essentially zero wiggle room left. Left for your long shot mathematics. Left for your long shot madness. Yet despite all that enormous proof of mine, you still don't need to surrender to my birthing translation, or even surrender to my Yahweh translation for that matter. Whew. What a relief, huh? However, you still need to surrender to the Bible, which is to say you still must be born again, or else you would be better off stillborn, according to a certain Jesus, according to a certain Yahweh. Since failing that biblical surrender, your name will most certainly not be written on a far better billboard, will not be written into the book of life. And you really don't want to miss that birthing census, now do you? Cheers.